Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're zeroing in on introversion and extroversion, going a bit beyond just the simple definitions.
Yeah, we want to understand how society actually, sees and values these different ways of being.
And our main guide for this is Susan Cain's really interesting book, Quiet, The Power of Introverts.
You've probably thought about this yourself, right? Like, where do I fit on that spectrum?
Exactly. And how does it affect your life? Maybe prepping for a big meeting or figuring out team dynamics.
Or even just, understanding yourself a little better.
Right. So we've gathered insights from psychology research, historical trends, and some quite telling personal stories to really unpack this.
Our goal today is basically to distill the key takeaways from these sources about introversion, extroversion.
And give you a clearer, maybe more nuanced picture of yourself and, well, everyone around you.
Okay, so let's jump right into something our sources call the extrovert ideal.
Ah, yes.
This idea suggests that, well, introversion often gets treated like a second-class personality trait.
Yeah, it's almost like being, I don't know, discounted for a core part of who you are. The sources even compare it to, like, the experience of women in a man's world sometimes.
That's a powerful analogy. It highlights how society can sort of unintentionally turn extroversion into this oppressive standard.
And it has real effects, doesn't it? There's research mentioned, though not super detailed in our source here, suggesting talkative people are often rated as smarter.
And even better looking.
Right, which is kind of wild when you think about it. It's a bias.
Definitely a bias. It really shapes how we perceive people.
Okay, so to bring this down to earth a bit, let's talk about that story of Laura, the negotiator.
Oh yeah, that's a great example.
She talks about feeling really uncomfortable, kind of outmatched by these very assertive bankers doing what she called speechifying and dominance posing.
I think a lot of quieter people can probably relate to that feeling,
Hmm.
Being in a room where the energy just feels different, loud.
But what's interesting is how her natural style, just asking these simple, quiet questions, actually disrupted their whole dynamic.
Yeah, it kind of threw them off their game, didn't it? Instead of just posturing, they actually had to, like, engage in a real conversation.
And then there's that moment where one banker just storms out, papers flying,
Uh-huh.
and Laura just stays completely calm. She called it negotiation jujitsu.
That's brilliant. And the outcome. She didn't just win the business.
She had a job offer, all by sticking to her quieter, more thoughtful approach. It really shows that raising your voice isn't the only way.
Absolutely. It proves that different styles have real strengths. And for Laura, it sounds like it was a real turning point. She started to accept her introversion more.
And felt less need to sort of self-flagellate about being quiet. Fewer self-accusations, as the source puts it.
Yeah. So when we talk about introversion, what are we actually, what's the core idea?
Well, our sources point back to Carl Jung. Way back in 1921, he kind of laid the foundation.
Right? He described introverts as being mainly oriented towards their inner world, thoughts, feelings.
Whereas extroverts are more focused outward on people, activities, the external world.
And Jung also noted introverts focus more on the meaning they find in events, that internal processing.
Well, extroverts are more about just being in the event itself, immersing themselves.
Which also explains the whole recharging thing, right?
Yeah.
Introverts need solitude to refuel.
And extroverts get their energy from socializing. It's fundamental.
And it's worth mentioning the Myers-Briggs test, which loads of people know.
Oh, yeah, MBTI.
That's based on Jung's thinking,
Yeah.
these core concepts.
Okay, so building on that, the sources also bring up highly sensitive introverts. Now, this isn't just, crying at movies.
No, it's actually a technical term in psychology, highly sensitive person, or HSP.
Right, and these individuals, they tend to experience the world more intensely.
Yeah, exactly. They might be really moved by art or acts of kindness, but also more deeply affected by, say, violence or ugliness.
They often have a strong conscience, maybe got labeled shy as kids.
And they might feel particularly nervous when they feel like they're being evaluated. Public speaking, first dates, that kind of thing.
And the statistic mentioned is that about 70% of these highly sensitive people are also introverts.
Yeah, quite a significant overlap.
But it's really important, and the sources stress this, that introversion is a spectrum.
Absolutely crucial. Not every introvert is going to tick all these boxes.
Some introverts might say, nope, not shy or not particularly sensitive, and that's totally fine.
Exactly. We're trying to paint a broad picture here. The idea is, take what resonates with you.
And use the rest to maybe understand the people around you a bit better. Everyone's different.
Right. Which kind of leads us to some of the big questions about introversion and extroversion that we're going to dig into. based on what we've read.
Like, why are some people naturally chatty and others more reserved?
Yeah, and why some people love working alone while others are always organizing the office party.
Or why some seem comfortable taking charge and others, well, they prefer supporting roles.
And can introverts actually be leaders? That's a big one.
Spoiler,
Huh.
the sources definitely suggest yes.
Uh-huh, right. And also, this cultural preference we see for extroversion, is that just natural or did we kind of build it?
Good question. And even like from an evolutionary standpoint, why would introversion even stick around? What's the benefit?
And finally, should introverts always just stick to their comfort zone, or is there value in stretching themselves? You know, like Laura did in that negotiation.
Lots to unpack there.
Definitely.
So to really get a handle on where this cultural tilt towards extroversion might have started, we need to jump in the time machine a bit.
Okay, where are we going?
Back to the turn of the 20th century, around 1908 or so. Think corporate America booming, Henry Ford, J.C. Penney.
Ah, the rise of big business.
Exactly. And this economic shift started creating demand for a, quote, new kind of man.
The salesman.
Bingo. Suddenly, social skills, making connections, that good impression, it became increasingly tied to success.
And this is where Dale Carnegie comes in, right?
Yeah.
Famous for how to win friends and influence people.
Yes, and interestingly, he apparently had to overcome his own shyness first. His institute focused specifically on teaching businessmen these skills.
And didn't he write about public speaking pretty early on?
He did. In a 1913 book, he called public speaking an indispensable weapon in business competition.
Wow, indispensable weapon.
That's quite a shift from seeing it as just some, peculiar gift only a few people had.
Totally. And this focus on outward charm, it just exploded in the 1920s.
Right, the Roaring Twenties. The self-help guides started changing focus.
Dramatically. Less about inner virtue, more about how to say it, how to present yourself.
It was all about the external package.
Yeah, you started seeing advice literally on how to create a personality, develop manners which made people think he's a mighty likable fellow.
Mighty likable. So magazines got in on it too. Yep. Success Magazine, the Saturday Evening Post, they started adding departments just on conversation skills.
It's such a contrast. You mentioned Orison Swett Martin. He wrote about character in 1899.
And then, bam, 1921, he releases a book called Masterful Personality.
Really shows the tide turning, doesn't it?
It does. And this pressure around personality, it wasn't just for businessmen.
No, it affected everyone. Both genders faced these new expectations in the 20s.
For women, it sounds like it was particularly tricky, this kind of double bind.
Yeah, needing to be proper, but also engaging and charming. And shyness, especially like in dating, could get you labeled, well, negatively. Frigid, the source mentions.
Ouch. And psychologists were noticing this shift too. Gordon Allport.
He was apparently quite reserved himself.
Yeah, he developed a test for social dominance, the ascendant submission test.
Right. And he observed that civilization seemed to value the aggressive person, the go-getter.
Pretty blunt assessment.
And even Carl Jung back in 1921 saw it happening. He called it the newly precarious status of introversion.
Precarious status. Wow, even though he saw introverts as vital.
Absolutely. He called them educators and promoters of culture, people who valued their interior life. But he acknowledged the growing prejudice against their reserve and apparently groundless embarrassment.
It's fascinating he saw that bias forming so early.
It really is. Around the same time, early 20th century, there was also all this talk about the inferiority complex, IC.
Right. It was apparently so common it almost became like a mark of distinction.
Yeah, kind of weirdly fashionable. A 1939 Collier's article apparently cited Lincoln and Napoleon as examples of people who overcame it.
Huh. But despite that sort of romantic view, the experts dealing with kids, they started getting worried about shyness, right?
They did. In the 1920s, child guidance experts shifted focus. It wasn't just about, delinquency or sexual precocity anymore.
It became about maladjusted personalities.
Exactly. And shyness was seen as a major red flag.
They started framing it as potentially leading to really bad stuff, alcoholism, suicide.
While being outgoing was presented as the key to success, the golden ticket.
So the advice to parents was,
push your kids to socialize. Get them out there.
and schools were told to focus more on personality development, maybe even more than book learning.
Pretty much. This culminated really in that 1950 mid-century White House Conference on Children and Youth. Their slogan was literally, a healthy personality for every child.
Wow, that says a lot.
Doesn't it? And moving into the mid-century, William White's work, The Organization Man.
Ah, yes, the man in the gray flannel suit era.
Kind of. He found that college deans understood the ideal employee, even for jobs not facing the public.
Was still that hardy extrovert, the salesman type, not necessarily the deep thinker.
Right. White noted how brilliant often got paired with negative qualifiers like introvert or eccentric.
As if being brilliant and introverted was somehow inherently problematic.
Exactly. He even quoted a 1950s executive saying it was important for scientists to make a good impression.
Even scientists. It shows how deep that extrovert ideal ran across all sorts of fields.
It does. And understanding this history really helps explain, why we might still have some of these ingrained biases today.
Yeah, it wasn't always this way. Seeing how those ideas about personality and success kind of grew alongside everything else. It's illuminating.
And it really makes you think about those early views, framing shyness almost as a defect to be fixed.
Feels like we're still sort of grappling with some of that legacy.
I think so too.
Yeah.
And we've really just, scratched the surface here. We've looked at how this focus on extroversion developed and how introversion was often seen as, well, a bit of a problem.
Right. So looking ahead in future parts of this deep dive, we'll get into things like charismatic leadership, the myths around group work.
The actual science and biology behind temperament is fascinating, and also practical strategies. How introverts can navigate a world that often feels built for extroverts, all based on the material we're exploring.
Okay, so that brings us to a final thought for you, our listeners, today. Thinking about this whole historical journey, this strong societal push towards extroversion we've talked about.
Yeah, maybe take a moment to reflect on your own life. Have you ever felt that pressure, that nudge to be more outgoing, more talkative, more like that extrovert ideal?
And maybe more profoundly, what could change for you personally in terms of fulfillment, but also for society?
Right. What if we truly understood, and more importantly valued, the unique strengths that introverts bring right from the beginning?
Definitely something to mull over.
Yeah.
Huh.
We'd love for you to think about these things and maybe let us know what other aspects of introversion and extroversion you're curious about for future deep dives.